Hello and welcome to Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. I am Colred, and today we have the final episode of Call of the Arbiter series. But before we do that, we have to do episode 9. We still have to do our video on episode 9. So today we're going to be doing 2 videos, hopefully, one on episode 9 and one on episode 10. Now, I've really been enjoying the series. If you haven't watched my previous videos in the series, we've covered every single episode along the way. I waited until about the last week because I wanted to kind of binge watch them and do videos every day, and I thought that was going to be fun. So that's what I've been doing. So if you haven't, go back and watch my videos on the previous episodes. One of the things that we do in every video is we read the lore of the characters that we see in the video. And what I've been finding is the combination of the episode, the animated series episode, and reading the lore, that combination makes for a much deeper experience. And it's definitely more fulfilling. It's more enjoyable to kind of experience the lore of Raid Shadow Legends with that combination. But now we have the episode entitled Bad Alcazar. That's episode 9. We already read a bit of his lore because the campaign in the game of Raid Shadow Legends, the campaign story, we already know that story, and we know that Bad Alcazar is going to be the main bad guy in that story from the cutscenes in the game. And so we read his lore early on in the first video. But just a reminder, he was once called Valkonen. He was a mage in the city of Ireth. Then something happened. We don't know what happened. He left for a while. He came back and then became Grandmaster of Ireth after his return. So he's got a bit of a transformation to undergo. You know, we've seen him as Bad Alcazar, but I'm assuming at this point we're going to get kind of an origin story and see him as Valkonen. And maybe we'll actually find out what that event was that caused him to flee Ireth in the first place. And also maybe what motivated him to return and what happened in the interim. Okay, so let's jump into the episode and just get started.
Our time grows short. Attend well, champions. You must know your enemy.
Okay, so very quickly, I have been kind of examining this in the opening scene with the Arbiter each time to see what little hints, little foreshadowings she gives. Obviously, the animation of the introduction is the same every time, but the voiceover is different every time. So at this point, she's not calling any more heroes. I don't know if we've maxed out at our heroes at 6 or 7, depending on if a Lord joins the group. Maybe additional heroes will come, but they haven't been directly called by the Arbiter. And so they will just be joining forces with our core group of heroes. Or, you know, it could just be that the story requires that we move on from the collection of heroes. And now we talk about Bad Alcazar, who's the bad guy, who's the enemy. So let's keep going.
It took great magic to find you. And even greater magic to fight the curse that ravaged your body. And not just my magic.
Perhaps, in exchange for saving your life, you will tell us where to find Bad Alcazar.
A fair trade, if you ask me.
Trust elves, dwarves, and men.
Bad Alcazar. Who is he?
Before he took the name Bad Alcazar, his name was Valkonen. At the Academy of Magic, where the brightest and best studied the occult and arcane arts, he was without equal. Except for one, Valkonen's rival, Arion.
Oh, Valkonen.
My lady.
Okay, so I have to say something at this point. My main criticism of this entire series has been based around the idea that it doesn't feel particularly original, that it's very derivative, and that the showrunners are relying on the audience's previous knowledge of the fantasy genre to kind of fill in backstory. And I know that the episodes are very short. This one's only 5 minutes and 51 seconds, and they have to pack a lot in. But this is Harry Potter, right? Like, they even look like characters from Harry Potter. This looks like Harry's father. That's I'm sorry, not Valkanen. That's Arion. And then Snape, right? Severus Snape is Valkanen. And then the woman who becomes Lily Potter is the woman whose affections they are dueling for here. So this is very similar. The wands and the paper flying around the room as a bird. Like, this is all very reminiscent of Harry Potter. Now, Harry Potter is great, and I love Harry Potter, but I would like to see something a little bit less derivative, something a little bit original. There is space in the fantasy genre, and you can fill that space with a lot more imaginative and varied depictions than what we're getting so far here. Now, that being said, Valkanen maybe not the biggest character. Like, maybe his background isn't quite as important in the trappings as it is in the substance, what actually happens to cause him to turn evil. But it does feel like I'm watching a rewrite of a story I've already watched before. That's disappointing, because I thought the last few episodes were very strong and started to get away from that a little bit. But that is the main criticism that I've had of this entire series. Again, I don't think you have to be completely original to be good, right? You just have to serve the story well. But when you're so obviously ripping off other popular fantasy stories, it does feel a bit like lazy writing to me.
Arion presented a riddle to Valkanen. How could he best him at every turn? But there is a voice that spoke to Valkanen across the barrier between worlds. A voice of great power. Valkanen had been warned about dark magic. But now, he could feel the power of Siroth, raw and merciless. The warnings of his teachers now reeked of cowardice. Darkness was just another side of power. There was nothing to fear. He was no longer Valkanen. He was becoming more than human.
Okay, that's kind of cool, right? That I mean, again, a little bit reminiscent of some other stories that we've seen, but this is at least a more original version or a more original take on Valkanen's history than the first bit that seemed very Harry Potterish. I'm not saying you couldn't also find this kind of story elsewhere. Temptations by sort of an unknown power. Dark just being, the opposite of light, and the rationale that power is power. Like, those are also familiar themes, but at least it's not so directly drawn from one particular source. And it does further that conversation that the Arbiter started in the previous episodes about, is it worth it? Where does evil come from? Is it worth continuing to fight that? Why does evil always, like, every time she defeats it, it seems to come back? And she's tired and weary. And why? Why does this happen? And she's looking for people who can see the truth. And so, this at least ties into that theme more directly. And I also thought visually it was kind of cool. It happened very quickly. And that sometimes happens in stories. They just kind of have a transformation very quickly. He's jealous and all of a sudden he's evil. Okay. But at least we have an understanding of his motivation. We have an understanding of the source of his power. It was also kind of cool to see the visual, like, flash forwards. Like, it was the face of Bad Alcazar who was enticing Valkanen. And of course, Valkanen becomes Bad Alcazar. So Is it possession? Is it foreshadowing? Is that simply that like this is the other side of his personality calling out to him? We'll have to find out.
For months, Valkonen trained in secret, laboring to understand Serath's dark arts. His magic now extended beyond illusions, mere appearances. This was real magic. The changing of things. He now called out to Serath, and in that moment bound his soul to the god of chaos. All power has a price.
What's happened?
Okay, so now we know the event that drove him from Irith the first time. It seemed like, you know, in his lore that Valkonen wasn't seen as an evil man. You know, he was seen as maybe desperate or potentially, you know, the victim of an accident. And so we kind of get that here. This is sort of an accident, but not really, right? He did something with an intention of showing up his rival or, you know, overshadowing the other students. And the outcome was maybe more severe than he expected, but it was at his direction. He was the one who chose to enact this form of magic. So to say that he's the victim of an accident is really not fair. To say that they're the victim of an accident is not fair, right? They are the victim of his ambition. Okay, let's continue.
He's been alive far longer than you know. He's going to use the sword to unseal the Tower of Beasts. Within are creatures of unimaginable power, and nothing will be able to stop his conquest.
There is one thing. The Arbiter.
She is without form. Khazar does not fear her any more than he does the rain.
If we reclaim the sword, we would have all we needed to summon the Arbiter. And then, you could have your revenge. The sword, we would have all we needed to summon the Arbiter. And then, you could have your revenge.
Okay, so Azura is clearly enticed by the idea of revenge against Bad Khazar. Now, in the previous episode, the Arbiter calls her like she called the other heroes, right? She actually named Allure and said, you know, will you answer the call? And all of them had to make a choice between following the way that they were taught and a higher calling that they believed in. And they all made that choice. Even Yizzo and Newt, to a certain extent, had to make a heroic choice in some way. They had to choose to help this cause. And here, she's being motivated by revenge, which doesn't feel like a good motivation. You know, it does make sense, right? She's a demon spawn. She's been betrayed. Her previous motivation was revenge against humans and loyalty to Bad Khazar. Then she was betrayed by Bad Khazar, so why wouldn't she change loyalties and want revenge against him? They've helped her now, so, you know, there is perhaps a feeling of gratitude there for these champions who have helped her. But it feels different than the other champions joining the call of the Arbiter. So I'm not sure how that will play out, if that will play out, but there is that sort of interesting twist there. And then also, we don't get to see much more of Bad Alcazar. So it's obviously we have to rely on the lore. So let's go take just another quick look. We'll scan over the lore of Bad Alcazar just to see how it reflects upon this episode. All right, let's go ahead and look at the champion lore here. So the Irith that was the Mage Academy is long gone. It is in its place is a nightmare filled with monsters and madmen. And the blame for this transformation has been laid at the feet of the legendary Grandmaster of the Mage Academy, the powerful necromancer Bad Alcazar. So he's the cause of Irith becoming an evil place. But here it says Khazar was not always an evil soul, but he was always ambitious and highly skilled. Little is known of his early life, but beyond that his name was once Valkonen, and that he eventually fell to the dark temptations of Siroth. So we know that Siroth is the one who offered him power. We know that he bound his soul to Siroth when he killed his fellow classmates. Whether the fall was before or after he fled Irith following a bloody incident in which dozens of mages and scholars were slain, few know. But when Khazar returned to the city, he was a changed man in mind and body. He swiftly took control, letting none stand in his way, even those he once counted as friends. Though his victories were always political and peaceful, won with cunning. It would be interesting to see how he returned to the city after murdering a bunch of people and then took power politically, right? Like he didn't kill all of his opponents. They were not bloody. But, you know, so here we have definitely another view of this event. You know, maybe not everybody believed that Valkonen was responsible for the death. There, you know, all the witnesses, the direct witnesses were obviously slain. So maybe, you know, the people of the city suspected Valkonen, but couldn't prove that he was the cause. And therefore that opened a window for him to be able to return. I don't know. A handful of more charitable scholars who have studied Irith's history dare suggest that Bad Alcazar's motives were not purely evil. They posit that they were, and may still be, partially rooted in desperation, in a desire to restore life to those slain in the disaster he fled the city after years earlier. Such claims have never been verified. So, after running through the mirror and before returning, he may have been motivated by the idea that he could maybe return life to the people that he had killed, that he could somehow make up for his, crime. But anyway, so there is a lot that goes on with Bad Alcazar. If you haven't seen my previous video, it's the very first video in the series, you may want to go watch that one. I talk more about the lore there, or you can go ahead in the game and read this for yourself. It's a very interesting story, and I think it's much more interesting than sort of the Harry Potter derivative, you know, student of the Magic Academy that we see at the beginning of this episode. My hope is that this final episode, episode 10, will be a little bit better than this one. This was a downturn. This was the first downturn, I think, in the whole series. It's not that it was a bad episode, but I thought that episodes 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, each one was getting better than the previous one, and I was getting more and more excited. And then this one felt a little bit lackluster. Wasn't in love with this episode. Maybe it's because we didn't get to see the heroes that much, and I was really excited about that. Or maybe it's just, you know, the treatment of Bad Alcazar feels too copycat for me. But that being said, I'm still really excited for the finale. It obviously dropped today. I hope you haven't watched it yet. I hope you go ahead and watch it with me. Or if you have watched it, you just watch it again with me anyway. We'll be doing another dive into the lore after that episode as well. So thanks for hanging out. Please put a comment in the comments below. Let me know if you've been enjoying the series, the Call of the Arbiter series. Let me know if you've been enjoying my video series. If you have, feel free to drop a like or subscribe. And yeah, I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Valkonen? Is he evil? Is he desperate? Is he too derivative? Does he seem like other bad guys we've known in the fantasy genre already? Any thoughts you're having on the series? I want to have that conversation. So definitely reach out and let me know what you're thinking. Thanks so much for hanging out. I've been Colred. I will see you in another video soon.